What is it like to be in a secret occult order? I'm going to talk from my own experiences. Over the decades, I've been in several different esoteric and occult orders. I'm going to speak about two that are very different, so it should give us some kind of insight into the sort of spectrum that is out there. The Illuminates of Thanateros, a chaos magic order that was probably more relevant and more prevalent during the 1990s or a little bit before that, when I was a member, and the Societas Rosicruciana in Civitatibus Federatis, or the Rosicrucian Society in the United States of America. Why would we want to ever join such an order or have an interest in these sorts of subjects? Well, there may be personal reasons, of course, but on a sort of cultural, societal level, these things have had a profound effect on our culture, perhaps especially our literary culture, whether it's, medieval tales of the Green Knight, or Chaucer referencing alchemy, or Ben Jonson, another English playwright, talking about alchemy, or Shakespeare's Tempest, or in Germany, Wolfgang von Goethe's work, or Mozart's Magic Flute, of course, influenced by the Egyptian rite of Freemasonry itself, not actually influenced by anything Egyptian, but by Rosicrucianism and alchemy and so on. Or a little more controversially, perhaps, the philosophy of Georg Hegel, the philosopher who shaped the thought of Karl Marx. He has recently been described as a Freemason and Rosicrucian. If you actually understand what he's saying, he seems to be condemning these things. But whether these figures are parodying or promoting, you can't really understand what they are saying unless you have some kind of knowledge of the esoteric, Rosicrucianism, alchemy, quote unquote, the occult, and so on. Now, my personal adventures in this world began young. When I was 15, I picked up a book on astral projection. When I was 17, I became involved in a neo-pagan group that was active on the outskirts of Kent and London. And, it did have the very positive effect, the latter, of persuading me that there was more to life than just shopping malls and fashion and day-to-day concerns and the 9 to 5, and that there was something deeper and more integral and stranger and more mysterious and more romantic in a certain sense than one was led to believe by society at that time. Britain, of course, was a very secular country. It did, of course, have the Church of England, but that had lost its grip on society many decades earlier. And if it wasn't for mass immigration propping that church up, it would have collapsed years ago. It has no cultural cachet in Great Britain or England today. So I, after being a member of this neo-pagan group, I was looking for something more serious, something deeper, and like all people who became involved in esoteric and occult groups at that time, you couldn't just find them. The internet was not a thing. No one was using the internet. Most people had never heard of the internet. You would have to go to an occult shop or a new age shop. You would have to buy some kind of magazine or journal, read through it, see what orders and organizations were either promoting themselves in there or being written about. You would have to contact them through a letter, actually on paper, and then wait for a reply, correspond with them for a few months, maybe be invited. Yes, of course, there were always going to be sort of correspondence courses where you could just send money. But if you wanted something more serious, it was a definite process and you could be weeded out at any point. So I one day picked up a leaflet, if I remember correctly. It was a few Xeroxed pages on orange paper, And in there, there was an article on the Illuminates of Thanateros written by Ian Reid, who at that time was the head of the then only London temple, a temple being a group of people, not a physical building. And it was immediately obvious to me that this was very different from neo-paganism or other traditions that I had heard about, such as Kabbalah. It did not claim to represent some ancient, thousands of year old tradition that had been passed down through the generations against Christian persecution, miraculously surviving, only to emerge and reveal its secrets, which were exactly in line with society whenever they revealed them, and not in the slightest bit controversial, which is usually what the secrets turn out to be, weirdly enough. Instead, the article was really emphasizing sort of experimentation. It was obviously influenced by at least notions of science, in particular chaos mathematics. If I remember correctly, the illustration accompanying the article was of the cartoon character Garfield the cat superimposed on a Mandelbrot. The Mandelbrot being a kind of diagram, we won't go into it now, but which comes out of chaos mathematics, the Mandelbrot set. And, so it was very, very different. I wrote to Ian Reid. I got a reply 2 days later, which is about the minimum time that an actual physical letter could reach its destination and be responded to and sent back, which surprised me a lot. I probably received a reply promptly because they were hosting an evening where you could go along and meet members and ask questions. And I went along to that. That was held in a pub somewhere in London. I don't recall where. I met Ian Reid and Ingrid and Nick Hall, and I spent quite a bit of time talking to Nick Hall, who asked me, I thought, well, what were some very basic questions about the occult and the esoteric. But we both had long hair at the time and were into the same sort of music, so that was probably another reason we talked for a while. Then I was invited, I think by letter, like certainly by letter, to attend an IoT London Temple open night where they would be performing rituals and we could go along and see what it was all about. I, by this time, really wanted to become a member. It just seemed a lot more serious than I had encountered before, and they seemed serious. And so I suggested to Charles Brewster, who had actually written the letter to me, that I go along and perform a ritual as well. I did this. They performed, I think, maybe 3 rituals. I performed one. The ritual I performed was based on thinking of one idea and then think of its opposite, and then with increasing speed going back and forth between the two, so that you would enter what Zen Buddhism might call no mind, or a state of trance. So that was what I was practicing, and of course the temple performed it with me. It was a group ritual in that sense. And then after that, they asked me to join, again by letter. They asked me to work through a particular section in Peter J. Carroll's Liber Null called Liber MMM, which focuses on visualization, meditation, and lucid dreaming. Technically, that is the work of a 4th degree member of the IoT. I was not yet a member, and I had actually completed that section by the time that I was initiated. I was initiated one Saturday evening in an area called the Elephant and Castle in London, quite a dangerous area at that time. I was initiated by Peter J. Carroll. He lived in Bristol but had travelled to London that weekend, not to initiate me, it should be said. That was a coincidence. But of course, being the head of the IoT at that time, he took it upon himself to initiate me in this sort of group initiation ritual, which was, it should be said, very impactful, sort of visually impressive, and interesting, and certainly gave you the feeling that this was a serious order that you couldn't just walk into, and that you had to work your way into. After that, it was evident to me, and probably evident from that ritual, that this was an order that expected a big commitment. And it was a big commitment personally, in terms of personal connections between people, a big commitment in terms of your work, and even a commitment creatively. In terms of personal connection, certainly I spent quite a lot of time meeting Nick Hall in particular, and I would sleep around his apartment, sometimes on the floor. He had a couple of apartments, and one of them we had to sleep on the floor. So, we were not talking about wealthy individuals here. He would stay at my apartment, and we would meet up with other people occasionally. Ian Reid, certainly Charles Brewster. I went to his house quite a lot in southeast London. And, of course, we would also attend esoteric lectures, particularly an event called Talking Stick that was held in London, but I forget where. And Charles Brewster also put on his own series of lectures at a Bullfrogs Cafe in Greenwich, which I believe is still there, and an area of London that I knew well. Creatively speaking, Ian Reid was the editor of Chaos International, and most of the members would contribute articles. I contributed a couple of illustrations under a pseudonym, and I also contributed an article and I think an illustration as well to another magazine called Thanateros, or Thanateros Journal, which was published by the IoT in Los Angeles at that time. Other members, including Ian Reid, would give lectures as well. It's interesting, I think, to note that rather like the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which attracted so many sort of literary and artistic figures, actresses, theatre persons, poets, authors, artists. The London Temple of the IoT, which had about eight members in it when I was there, I think virtually all of us became writers, authors, to Ian Reid and another member of his, let's say, entourage, were avant-garde musicians. Ingrid was a translator, particularly thinking of her translating Sigil Magic by Frada UD. And the rest of us were authors, or became authors later on. So Nick Hall later published Chaos and Sorcery. Charles Brewster published his lectures as a self-published book. And I, of course, have published several books since then. So, it was a creative atmosphere and a dynamic atmosphere, quite unlike any other. If you join temples or orders, typically you don't find that every member of the temple is ever becomes a musician, authors, translators, artists. Not at all. On the rather more negative and sort of destructive side, it should be said that at that time was the first Gulf War, and also the quote-unquote ice magic war between the British IoT and the German IoT. And I think these things became kind of conflated in the mind, that there was a sense of siege that really seeped into the IoT, at least into the London Temple of the IoT, for various reasons that I won't go into. But one of those, which I will mention, is that we have been using Babylonian symbolism, among others, of course, and there was some kind of Babylonian symbolism in the Iraq War. I believe that Saddam Hussein even mentioned, Babylon, which is where ancient Babylon was, of course, and there were other things as well. You might even recall that there was a resolution 666 passed by the United Nations, which put a lot of people, probably especially Christians, on edge, because it did seem to be apocalyptic. And there was that feeling within the IoT, within the London Temple, that we were very much at the end, that we were to use an expression that I think Ian Reid would appreciate, that we were in the times of Ragnarok, this sort of, cataclysmic war of the gods against the enemies of the gods, and it was all going to end in destruction and doom and this sort of eternal winter. That was very much the feeling that one got, which is not necessarily very healthy for one's normal everyday life, of course. But it was, one might argue that it was also a kind of bonding as well. So, there were good and bad. Well, if you're enjoying this content, do like and subscribe. I'm going to be talking more about the esoteric and the occult and symbolism and spirituality and all of that good stuff. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to something very different, but still within that world, and that is the Societas Rosicruciana in Civitatibus Federatis. So about 10 years after leaving the IOT, and I moved from London, where I grew up, to New York City at that point. And I joined Freemasonry, and then about 2 years after that, in 2003, I was invited to join the Societas Rosicruciana. Now, you couldn't petition to join. At that time, they didn't have a website. They were not interested in having a presence even within Freemasonry, even though to become a member, you had to be a Freemason. You could not be just a member of the public or have an interest in the esoteric or anything like that. So how did one join? Well, rather like the IOT, where you would have to go to a bookshop, you'd have to read some esoteric publication, you'd have to find some esoteric order in there that was being written about, contact them, wait for a response, and then some sort of communication between you two. So quite a process. With the Societas Rosicruciana, you would be invited if you came to their attention. I came to the attention of the Long Island College of the Societas Rosicruciana specifically, as I began giving lectures on Freemasonry a few months after being made a Master Mason. And I gave them to lodges, and I gave public talks at the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Library of the Grand Lodge of New York, which anyone could come to. And I also started painting what are called tracing boards. These are paintings that historically, traditionally, were displayed during the Masonic rituals at a certain point to accompany a lecture about the emblems or the symbols of Freemasonry, and the symbols would be depicted on these paintings. And I still have 3 hanging in the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Library and Museum today. So, I came to the attention of the Long Island College of the Societas Rosicruciana. I was asked discreetly by one of their members if I'd be interested in joining, and the initiation was arranged. I was initiated with 1 or 2 other people. I can only recall one person. And, I was immediately struck by a kind of caliber of intelligence and knowledge that I hadn't come across before, despite many good qualities in other people that I had encountered. At the night of the initiation, there was a lecture given by one of the members, and the lecture was on the philosophy of Plato and the 4 elements. And in the West, of course, the elements go back to ancient Greek philosophy, yes, written about by Plato, but to the pre-Socratic philosophers such as Empedocles and Thales. And although that is the origin of the elements in the West, how many Western esotericists know that? Not very many. How many neo-pagans who claim to be practicing, an ancient European tradition know that it goes back to ancient Europe? Well, not many that I have known. So anyway, this was the first time that I had heard somebody talking about these 2 things together, the Platonic philosophy and the elements, and I was pleasantly surprised by that. And, it struck me that there was some intelligence in the membership, rather like the IOT, of course. We also contributed in different ways, and we would write articles for the local college journal, or the United States Journal, or would one member was creating different ritual implements for us by hand. And, so there was a commitment on a creative level as well, which was great. And of course, we would also give lectures at meetings as well, or talks at meetings. So there was a lot of contribution, as there was in the IoT. So that was very interesting to see, and again, it was quite a bonding experience to be doing that with people. Now, these are very different orders. So the IoT is emphasizing the mind, pushing the mind, gnosis, trance, bringing forth the genius or unleashing the genius, whereas the Societas Rosicruciana is specifically concerned with conveying this tradition of rituals and degrees, and its knowledge, which goes back to the late 19th century. Of course, there are predecessors or precursors to the Societas Rosicruciana, but as that order, it's about 150 years old. And the rituals are specifically concerned with Hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, and this, more typical esoteric phenomenon that we are familiar with. These things seem to go together very often, of course, whether it's in the Ordo Templi Orientis or the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, or whatever have you. Now, I mentioned Chaucer and Shakespeare at the beginning. It should also be said that there were some, esoteric and literary heavy hitters in the Societas Rosicruciana throughout its history as well. So William Wynne Westcott and S.L. MacGregor Mathers, who formed the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They were very high-ranking members of the Societas Rosicruciana. And of course, they took the order's degree structure and used it for the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Originally, it had been the degree structure of a group called the Golden Rosy Cross in Germany during the 18th century, and then that was absorbed by the Societas Rosicruciana, and then from there into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. In regard to literary figures, Rudyard Kipling, maybe not as well known as he once was, but a sort of Anglo-Indian literary genius, a writer. It was a member of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, which is the English branch, and the Civitatibus Federatis is the American branch. So differences and similarities. Well, differences, of course, the IoT is about manifesting your genius, the trance, pushing beyond traditions, manifesting something of yourself in a unique way. And whereas the Societas Rosicruciana is about learning this tradition and passing down this tradition of Hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, and so on, touching on other things, tarot, Hebrew letters, astrology, symbolism of color, and this kind of thing as well. Learning that and passing that along to the next generation of initiates. So they're certainly very different. But again, from my experience in these orders, the similarities are also striking, and that is a very big commitment to the order. You put in work in writing articles, creating art, giving lectures, and performing the rituals as well. In the Societas Rosicruciana, you had to learn them word for word and perform your part from memory, not from reading, which would be regarded as completely shameful, at least at that time. So, a big commitment were required in both orders. These, of course, are unusual groups to be a part of, unusual orders, but, again, it is part of this sort of literary cultural world that has informed everything from Chaucer to Wolfgang von Goethe and Mozart. So and of course Rudyard Kipling. So not insignificant at all. I'm going to be talking more about the esoteric and spirituality and symbolism and personal development. So do check back. Thanks very much. Bye for now.